For decades, we've been told that hormonal birth control is the only way to regulate our cycles or protect our health. But what happens when we stop treating our symptoms as something to be silenced and start seeing them as data? Today, we are going to have a transparent conversation about the systemic impact of birth control, from gut health and nutrient depletion to the way it actually reshapes our brain chemistry. We are also tackling the fear tactics often used and, most importantly, exploring the non-hormonal tools and body literacy that gives you the ultimate permission to trust your body. Welcome to Healthy Buzz, the podcast for women who are craving honest answers in a supportive community. Hosted by Brandee, a certified nutrition therapy practitioner who believes your body isn't broken, but the narrative around women's health is. Each week, we're diving deep into holistic health topics, challenging the one-size-fits-all approach, and empowering you to trust your own informed intuition. Get ready to feel seen, supported, and seriously informed. This is Healthy Buzz, where collaboration meets unfiltered transparency in women's health. Joining me for today's conversation is Nicole Jardim. Nicole is a certified women's health coach and the author of the life-changing book, Fix Your Period, and the creator of the Fix Your Period Collective, a first-of-its-kind membership experience that will give you a clear roadmap to achieving better periods. Nicole has impacted tens of thousands of women worldwide by moving past system management to address the root cause of hormonal imbalances. She is the founder of the Institute for Menstrual Health and a sought-after expert for outlets like The Guardian and Well Plus Good, Mind Body Green, and Healthline. She's also the host of the top-rated podcast, The Period Party. Nicole blends evidence-based science with simplicity to help women reclaim her vitality at any age. Nicole, welcome to today's show.
Thank you so much for having me, Brandee. It's really good to connect with you today.
I'm so excited to have you on today's show. Number one, you were my mentor in the Women's Hormone Certification course that I took a couple of years ago, and I learned so much. So when I was thinking about, gosh, who would give us the most information when it comes to birth control and women's health, you're the first person that popped into my mind. So I cannot wait to unpack this topic even more with you today.
Well, I am so thrilled to be here and to talk about this because I feel like this is sort of the root of so many women's health issues, and we're going to dive in.
So first, before we dive all the way in, why women's health? Why are you so passionate about women's health and helping them understand the impacts of birth control?
This really is a personal story. And I would say that the vast majority of women who get into this work feel exactly the same way. They have some lived experience. And for me, it all started when I was a teenager. I really had what felt like the worst periods ever. I'm sure they weren't, but they felt that way. And it was one of those scenarios where my mom had also had really debilitating periods as a teenager. So I just assumed that that was what was normal. And I would say that the majority of women I talk to have felt similarly. They just were told, well, this is just a thing that happens. It's funny how we get that message over and over again from puberty through menopause. We don't know what's wrong with you. This is normal. But that was what was happening for me. I had extremely heavy, painful periods that massively disrupted my life. And then they became very irregular. So every 3 or 4 months, they would show up unannounced. And it finally got to become too much. And so I ended up seeing my mom's gynecologist, and she put me on the pill. And that to me felt like the first time I could sort of breathe a sigh of relief when it came to my menstrual troubles, because suddenly I didn't really have any problems anymore. And it was amazing how it just turns those things right off. And so it did that for me. But then within a couple of years, I remember thinking, whoa, maybe the painful and heavy periods weren't so bad after all, because I started having so many side effects from being on the pill, from melasma literally all over my face to hair loss, just everything. I felt like my body was just falling apart. I had horrible joint pain, stomach issues, you name it. I was the poster child for it. And it wasn't until I actually had an allergic reaction to a medication for a UTI, of which I had many being on the pill. Those UTIs and yeast infections just about took me out. And so I was on this medication that I didn't realize I was allergic to, and then ended up in the ER, bright red like a tomato, really high fever, all of that. And it was then that I decided, okay, I've got to do something different. And so I saw a friend's acupuncturist, and that was really what set me on this path. And I started to realize, wait a second, there's this whole world outside of the mainstream medical narrative that we've all been fed. I just was so hungry for it. I wanted more and more. And then I realized, wait, I might be able to help people with this. So that was how this all started. And that was over 20 years ago. So it has been quite a journey.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So relatable that so many of us have walked in the shoes that we are now advocating women on because we have that lived experience. I myself was on hormonal birth control for a total of 17 years because I didn't understand my body. We didn't talk about hormones or our bodies in my family. And so at 18, I chose to just disconnect from that side of my body. And then at 35, when I decided to go off birth control, because I'm like, what am I doing? I had this period that never showed up. And then 3 years later, I got diagnosed with PCOS. And I'm like, oh my gosh, so much makes sense now. I had masked and hid so much of those symptoms while still having massive other symptoms from being on hormonal birth control. So it definitely does impact our health more than what women are led to believe.
Amen to that. I could not agree with you more. I feel like this is one of the biggest challenges that we run into because of the systemic lack of education and lack of understanding of our bodies, which to me feels very on purpose. And because I think that if we did have that information, if we were educated in this way, it would change the trajectory of our lives. And as a result, women are just sort of led down this path of over medicalization of their bodies and over pathologizing our symptoms. So we end up in a situation like what you described, where I came off this thing and I had no clue what was going on. I was in the same boat too. I was now in my almost mid-20s when I came off of it. And I was completely clueless and terrified. This was before the days of even having an iPhone to track your cycle. There was none of that stuff. So I'm busy using a wall calendar. I mean, it was ridiculous. And I remember feeling so lost and so confused. And I know you see this all the time, but I do too. Women come to me all the time, whether it's via email or in my DMs or in my comments or wherever or in real life. And it doesn't matter how old they are just lost and confused and don't know what to trust. There's so much information now that is wonderful and simultaneously overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. So this brings up a really good question then, because women have heard their doctor say that the pill is going to regulate their cycle. So can we talk about how this is actually a myth and what is actually happening to a woman's normal hormonal rhythm when they're on hormonal birth control?
Yes, the regulation myth. It is one of the things that we come up most against, isn't it? I'd say when doctors say that the pill will regulate your cycle, what they really mean is that it's going to create predictable bleeding, ultimately, is what they're saying to you. That is very different from actually restoring your natural menstrual cycle, which is what I think most women are after when they're exploring that option. And a healthy cycle depends on constant communication between the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the ovaries. This is known as the HPO axis, the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. And so you just think of it as a bit of a superhighway between your brain and your ovaries, and there's constant communication. So your brain releases these signals through FSH and LH to stimulate your ovaries to mature a follicle, to ovulate, to produce estradiol, progesterone, testosterone. But the pill interrupts this conversation because it is suppressing ovulation. It's shutting down those hormonal signals that tell the ovary to release the egg. It's doing that because it contains a synthetic estrogen, a synthetic progesterone. And so what it is basically doing is overriding those signals from the brain, because your brain's like, oh, wait a second, we already have some estrogen in our body. So maybe we don't need to send those signals to the ovaries to make any more of it. And so without ovulation, there is no corpus luteum, which is basically where the follicle comes from. It starts producing progesterone after ovulation. So there's no corpus luteum. There's no meaningful progesterone production ultimately. There's really no estradiol production, at least not to any major degree. And then that bleed that occurs during the placebo week, where you would take your sugar pills or whatever you're taking, is not a true menstrual period. And this is across the board, because people ask me this all the time too, but is that across the board for all of these types of birth control methods? And I would say, yes, it is, minus the copper IUD. And in some cases, a hormonal IUD. Some women on the lower dose hormonal IUDs may still ovulate, but generally speaking, across the board. And if you have an implant or you're using a patch or something like that, that is the same too. Your ovulation is being suppressed. And so you're just having this withdrawal withdrawal bleed, or you're not even having a bleed at all. And this matters so, so much because ovulation, I call it the star of the show, the hormonal show, because it is a thing that allows us to produce these literal life-giving hormones, the estrogen, the progesterone, the testosterone. These hormones affect nearly every system in the body. And so this is not just about our fertility. This is about so much more. But unfortunately, historically, women's bodies have been relegated to just being vessels for babies. And that, I think, is really ultimately where the problem lies for so many of us.
Hey, Healthy Buzz listeners. Did you just get your labs drawn and you were told that everything looks normal but you feel anything but? You're feeling exhausted. Your hair is falling out. Your energy is crashing every afternoon. You're feeling burned out, anxious, and just completely off in your body. A common issue I see in women's health is that many women are only getting the very bare minimum labs run, and most aren't being told what additional lab values could provide a deeper insight into their symptoms. So they leave the appointment without real answers and without knowing what to ask for next. That's exactly why I created Hormone Insights, a free guide designed to help you better understand the labs that can offer valuable clues into factors impacting women's health, including thyroid function, iron status, hormone health, metabolic health, and more. Inside the guide, I walk you through both routine and enhanced lab testing, explain why each marker is, why it matters, and cover the important considerations that can significantly impact results like cycle timing and fasting. Because understanding your labs isn't about obsessing over numbers. It's about having better information so that you can advocate for yourself with more clarity and confidence. You deserve more than a vague reassurance when you know something feels off. So head to the show notes to download your free Hormone Insight Guide so you can start getting real answers with lab markers that matter. Yes, so much here. So what Nicole is saying is that the purpose of birth control is to inhibit ovulation. So it works to control you not getting pregnant, right? Not having a baby.
Right.
But conventional medicine has now skewed that to be like, oh, we can regulate your hormones when you put you on a birth control pill or whatever form of birth control. But what it's actually doing, as Nicole said, is making you have predictable periods, because that week where you don't take the pills, the placebo pills, that week you're going to have the withdrawal bleed. So it's not a true actual period that you're having. That's a withdrawal of the medications, of the synthetic hormones, that's now making you have this bleed that you think is a period. And it's not a true period because you did not ovulate.
Exactly. I know. And I think that we tend to, again, minimize the impacts that these medications have on our bodies. I think because they've been used so casually for so many decades. When you think about estrogen, like our endogenous estrogen that our bodies make, it supports bone density and cardiovascular health. Why do so many women in menopause have so many cardiovascular issues? It supports our skin function, our skin density, our vaginal health, our cognition. And I could go on and on. Women, again, in menopause, when we think about those levels of dementia and other cognitive decline, that's a massive issue for so many women. And we're finally talking about it. And then, with progesterone, very similar. It supports our sleep and our cognitive health as well, our nervous system regulation, our bone health, our heart health. I could go on and on. Testosterone, same thing. So it is just one of those things that when we're chronically suppressing ovulation and ultimately these very important sex hormones for which our body has receptors literally on every cell in the body, we're missing out on these really incredible physiological benefits of the hormones.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about how the pill does impact specific areas of somebody's health. So from a functional perspective, we know that birth control isn't just affecting our ovaries, as you just said. What about nutrient depletions? Because that can be pretty common with hormonal contraceptives. How might this show up as mysterious symptoms that women are experiencing, like fatigue and mood swings, all of that stuff? How does the pill or birth control in general deplete our nutrients?
Yes, I feel like this is a very practical conversation because we're often told, right, that like you said, the mood swings and the fatigue, and it's not just fatigue, it's like this bone crushing fatigue, right? The kind where you're just like, I can't motivate for anything. And the headaches and the random gut health issues. My gut was a disaster on the pill.
Oh, mine too.
I had a colonoscopy at 22 years old because they were like, well, we got to see what's going on here because you're a mess. And you did too. But how often are all of these things normalized? And I feel like we're told this. We're told that this is just kind of random. But there is research. And again, I want to say too that there's not a ton of great research, but we all have our lived experiences.
Shocker, women's health not being researched.
I know, right? It is so endlessly frustrating because, of course, there's not enough research. And the research that is there isn't amazing, but we quote it and then we're villainized for quoting it. But there's not enough research. I mean, you can make this stuff up if you fucking tried. So there is the research, and we also have our lived experiences. We have all this anecdotal evidence from a bajillion women at this point. I know that's so scientific, but there is a link between oral contraceptive use and changes in nutrient status, like folate and B6 and B12 and B2 and vitamin C and vitamin E and selenium and zinc and magnesium as well too, actually. So there is a connection there. I always say these nutrients are not nice to have. We actually need them. It's not some luxury here because they're involved in so much in neurotransmitter production. Again, hello, mood issues and why we feel like such shit when we're on the pill, mitochondrial function, immune health, hormone metabolism. I could go on. Methylation, like there's just so much that these nutrients are involved in. And when we think about how critical they are for ovarian function, for follicle health, for follicle development, no wonder so many women are either on the pill or coming off the pill feeling just completely depleted. And to me, this is such a huge issue because in fact, you know what? I wanted to say this too. I was just thinking about this the other day. I was in CVS, and which is our, chain of pharmacies. And yeah, I was in there the other day and I just happened to walk down the women's health aisle because I always like to check that out and see what's going on there. I was actually surprised pleasantly that they had a number of more natural products than I've ever seen before in the women's health aisle. So that was very cool to see. But what I did see was a product that was for if you're on the birth control pill. It was basically a vitamin supplement for if you're on the pill with all the things you need to take when you're on the pill because of the nutrient deficiency. So I'm, of course, looking at this product. I've never seen the brand before. And it's owned by, I don't know if it's a pharmaceutical company, but it's owned by some big conglomerate. And I kind of laughed out loud because I was like, wait a second, weren't we all the ones talking about this and getting so much flack for it over the last decade? And now here we are, helping women with their nutrient status when they're on the pill in CVS. Fascinating. So I will just say that to me was very validating and really supports everything we're talking about with regard to the side effects and the symptoms that women experience.
Yeah, I think what's really important for women to take away from this part of this conversation is that you need to be aware that you can have these nutrient depletions when you are on a hormonal birth control. And we're giving you information so that you can make informed decisions about your birth control status. Because we're not saying that like anybody, because there's a time and place, and we're going to get into the time and place where maybe people should be on birth control or need to be on birth control. But if you know this information, then you can be like, oh, hey, yeah, maybe I do need to make sure that I'm on a really good multivitamin, multimineral if I choose to be on hormonal birth control right now.
Amen to that, right? It is all about informed consent and really having an understanding of the pros and the cons. And this has been something that I always say when I'm accused of being anti-birth control or anti-hormonal birth control, because that's happened a few times. But my biggest thing is that women go into this, girls go into this, teenagers go into this without any real understanding of the potential health implications, short and long term. I certainly was that way. No one ever said in the 5.5 years that I was on this thing that could be part of the problem. It was that acupuncturist that I saw who was the first person to say this to me. And I didn't friggin' believe him because I thought, if you're telling me this right now, there's no way this can be accurate, because how is it that in the last 5.5 years, no one has said anything to this effect? This is what we see over and over again. People don't even believe us because they can't comprehend that they could be led so astray. But I'm sorry, you have been, likely.
Yep. But we're correcting that conversation.
We are
fixing the narrative around this here. So there is a growing concern around the link between hormonal birth control and mental health, specifically anxiety and depression. So how is hormonal birth control affecting mental health and altering those progesterone and estrogen levels, having such a profound impact on our brain chemistry?
Yeah, I think that there's some nuance here, obviously. And it's kind of like what you were saying earlier with the fact that not everyone's going to feel worse on hormonal birth control. I've had so many women over the years tell me they feel great. And so I always check, what does that mean exactly for you? And they maintain that they do, which again, right? We know this. Millions of women actually potentially take hormonal birth control or utilize hormonal birth control devices without incident. And that's good. So some women do feel more stable, whereas others actually experience a wide array of mental health challenges, whether that is anxiety that they can't shake, that emotional flatness, irritability, loss of motivation, depression. There's a lot. And there are some observational studies, and they're actually pretty large. They have found associations between hormonal contraception and later antidepressant use or depression diagnoses, especially among adolescents. So this again makes a lot of sense when we're talking about those nutrient deficiencies. And I want to talk about gut health and inflammation markers and all of those pieces of this puzzle, because it's not just one thing. And again, it relegates back to the fact that we have been so one-dimensional when we think about women's health, and we're not at all looking at how everything is so interconnected. That's a reflection on conventional medicine, isn't it? Because their take is that our bodies are just these little silos. The hormones are in one, and then the bone health is in another one, and then the gut health is in another one, and the brain health, oh, that's somewhere else completely. And so we're really not taking into account those interconnections, which I think is massively problematic. And so again, it makes sense mechanistically that your ovarian hormones are not just reproductive hormones, and that estradiol, progesterone, they interact with the neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine and GABA. And then they also play a role in our stress resilience, our ability to sleep and recover, and of course, in neuroinflammation as well. Estrogen is so anti-inflammatory, and so is progesterone. So I feel like we're kind of expecting this sort of one size fits all, right? I think that's one of my biggest beefs with medicine in general, is that this one size fits all approach doesn't quite work very well. And I think that when we think about synthetic progestins, for instance, and our own body's progesterone, they don't have the same effects on the body. So we've done this one size fits all thing. And then we also are expecting these synthetic hormones in the pill or whatever hormone choice we make to have the same impact as our own hormones. And they just don't. So it's definitely a combination of things for sure with regard to mental health.
Yeah. And I do want to point out the fact when we think about the conventional model of addressing health, not only is everything kind of looked at as in a silo, you also see separate practitioners for the different things, right? Oh, you have gut health, you go to the GI doctor. Oh, you have hormone issues, you go to endocrinologist, but they don't usually try to communicate with each other. Like I have one client that is just getting bounced around from specialist to specialist. I'm like, we need to like bridge the gap here. And she's starting to advocate really well for herself and being like, no, I need somebody to talk to me now about this situation and before you pass me off to the next person. And it's just so challenging to navigate that on your own sometimes.
It is. I feel like I'm a practitioner and I find it so challenging to navigate. And not only that, you have your whole life going on in addition to this, but yet this feels like a full-time job, just not getting the care that I think everyone should get, that really should be expected, which is that someone is going to listen to what you're saying and then be able to offer sound advice on what might be going on, as well as what you can actually do about it in a sustainable way. Because right now, as you know, the default is to just make a recommendation. We do some testing and then we make this recommendation, medical or surgical or otherwise. And that, as we have learned, it's not a great sustainable solution for what we're all dealing with. And for many of us, it is a chronic problem. It becomes a chronic problem because it just is left to fester and it just keeps growing. And then it gets its tentacles into other parts of the body. And then things become way more complicated than I would say most doctors are trained to handle.
Yeah, it does take some very careful navigation and a lot of advocation.
It really does. I know. Yeah, but that's tiring. I'm tired just even talking about it, honestly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, something we do talk a lot about is the gut terrain and how hormonal birth control can impact a woman's gut microbiome and contribute to systemic inflammation. So, why should someone with existing GI issues be cautious about hormonal birth control and the impact that it can have on their gut health?
Yeah, this is a big one. And this feels very important to me because I struggled so much. I remember as a teenager, I already had gut issues. I had a lot of bloating. I was basically constipated all the time. And then it got exponentially worse when I went on the pill. And of course, I didn't really think anything of it. I just thought, okay, well, I don't know. I just have these problems and this is normal for me. But again, the research is kind of lacking. But when you look at all of your clients and you see this trend over and over again, there is a very clear connection. There is some research, like I said. So it's basically indicates that hormonal contraception can increase intestinal permeability. We talk about this as leaky gut. And as we know, when the gut barrier becomes compromised, inflammatory molecules can enter the bloodstream and activate the immune system. And this can continue or contribute to a cycle of systemic inflammation, autoimmune activity, potentially pelvic pain, headaches, and migraines, and it'll further dysregulate hormones or our sex hormones. So I feel like there is definitely this inflammatory burden that is associated with the synthetic hormones in birth control. And it's also been associated with, again, the chronic inflammation and even insulin sensitivity problems as well. So impaired insulin sensitivity. So we definitely have a number of issues happening there as it relates to gut health and inflammation. And then for women who already have an inflammatory GI issue like IBS or IBD or SIBO or something else, I feel like taking the pill really warrants caution there. But as we've discussed, right, there isn't really a clear discussion about that for many women. There is also research to back that up that shows increased inflammatory markers like CRP when someone is taking oral contraceptives. And then there's the oral estrogen piece as well, which can potentially increase intestinal permeability in the context of those inflammatory bowel diseases, I should say. There are a number of pieces to this puzzle, and I think it's so individual, right? And I think that's what it comes back to is the nuance in women's health and dealing with human bodies in general is that what's okay for one person might not be for the other person. And so what happens, I find more than anything, is that someone will take this medication and then they'll have an increase in symptoms very similar to what I experienced. I felt like I had issues, but they were kind of manageable. But then, of course, they became completely out of control and unmanageable in my late teens and my early 20s. And again, you feel like you're going kind of crazy because you're having these symptoms, but you never got the memo in the beginning that stated, well, you might want to look out for these symptoms. And if you're having them, then we've got to try something else. And that, I think, is the biggest issue.
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of that informed consent around here are the side effects of some of these medications that's not really being talked about. And let's be honest, how many people take that little pamphlet that comes with the medication and actually reads it and reads what the side effects are? Like we hear all the commercials on TV with side effects of some medications. Like, why is anybody even taking that if they knew what those side effects were? But for school, I did a literature review about birth control pill and the impact on gut health. And it was pretty fascinating. Of course, a lot of the studies were very short and there were some inconsistencies amongst studies, but the general consensus is like it is changing the microbiome, the bacterial composition of the microbiome, and increase, like you said, with the IBD type issues, like more people were reported having Crohn's. And if you have Crohn's and then start taking birth control, like you're having a lot more issues with that, and things like gastroparesis where things are slowing way down. I'm like, oh my gosh, that tracks with so many of the symptoms that I was experiencing. I was way bloated, so bloated when I was on hormonal birth control and had a ton of acid reflux. I was passing around those Tums with all my friends all the time because it's just so constipated, so bloated, so much acid reflux.
Oh, the acid reflux. Yes, that was excruciating. I didn't even know what it was. I was just like, what is this feeling that I'm having? It is horrendous. But who was I going to ask? There was no one to even ask.
Right.
Yeah. I love that you were like, yeah, we just passed around the Tums.
Right. Who needs a Tums? We're all in our 20s and we're mowing down Tums like it's our job because we were all on hormonal birth control and all of our guts were fucked up.
Literally. Now that you have like unlocked a horrible teenage memory for me, 100%. My mom also had Tums in the house, so that's what I would use. So I think I remember describing it to her and she was like, oh, take some of these. But yeah, how ridiculous. I mean, like you said, we were so young and yet we were literally in these old lady bodies. This is what the loss of estrogen will do, you guys.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So one of the main things that we hear with birth control is that it can be protective against certain cancers. And so this is a big conversation that always sparks, I guess, a little rivalry or heated discussion around, oh, it can be protective against maybe like ovarian and endometrial cancer. But then there's also data that shows that it can increase the risk for other cancers, such as breast cancer or cervical cancer. So let's talk a little bit about the nuance and the trade-offs and suggest how women can become more informed about, hey, is this something that is going to be supportive or is it going to increase their cancer risk?
Yeah, this is such a great conversation. It's also where the nuance lives again, right? And when I think about hormonal contraception, yes, it is associated with a reduced risk of ovarian and endometrial cancers. And then there's also evidence of increased risk for breast and cervical cancers, like you were talking about. Obviously, this depends on a number of factors, of course, the formulation, the duration of how long, I feel like that's a double entendre. But anyways, yeah, however long we're using it, timing, individual risk factors, there's a lot of things that are going on there. I feel like it's a trade-off, right? Rather than a simple good or bad story. And I feel like, yes, I have gotten into many arguments online about this because I don't feel like the cancer conversation can just be reduced to the pill prevents these cancers. Like, okay, which cancer in which woman at what age for how long with what family history?
Right. What were their genetic predisposition? Yes.
Yes, exactly. That to me is the informed consent that we're looking for. I really want women to have a grown up conversation with their doctor about where their risk lies. What are my personal risks? What are the benefits to me utilizing this medication? What are the alternatives? I really struggle with the fact that we are sending the message that women's bodies are inherently broken in some way, that you need this thing to prevent these types of cancers that's going to potentially prevent you from having those cancers. Yet we're seeing in the anecdotal evidence and in the research that is there that it sets you up for all kinds of dysregulation, whether that's sex hormone dysregulation, gut microbiome problems, like you said, right? It changes your gut microbiome. We're talking about increased risk for inflammatory bowel problems, conditions, diseases. And then we talk about the brain function. And so I'm like, okay, at what cost are we preventing these two cancers? It's really, really challenging because it's viewed in such a black and white way. And you and I and everyone in our world lives very much in that big old gray area there in the middle. And so that's what I really struggle with, is that we want to really investigate whether something is right for us or not because we're just told this blanket statement that it can prevent or reduce the risk for breast cancer. There's tons of things that reduce the risk for breast cancer. Is this your best option? That's really the question I'm asking.
And I mean, do we even want to open this can of worms?
Yes, we do.
I mean, we're going to touch on HRT here a little bit then, because with HRT, with the study, the Women's Health Initiative study that villainized all HRT for so many years, the issue was more increased risk of breast cancer with progestins, which they were using in the study, right? And not progesterone. And so that's when we think about hormonal birth control, we're thinking about progestin, not progesterone.
Yep. I know. I mean, that's really the challenge, isn't it? Yeah. I think there's so many things. Again, I think that comes back to the big gray area, doesn't it? That we were told this blanket statement about how estrogen causes breast cancer. And all I could think about in that was, how is it that this hormone that our bodies make for the entirety of our lives is suddenly the thing that causes us to have breast cancer. It makes absolutely no biological sense at all. So there is that piece. And then, right, we have the progestin conversation that seems to have just been conveniently left out. And as a result, what do we have? We have an entire generation of women who lost out on having the potential benefits of being prescribed HRT. And now look at the situation that we're in. My mom had a heart attack recently and she passed away. And all I could think about was her decades of not having adequate estradiol and progesterone in her system. And I recognize that there are a lot of people who are talking about the fact that menopause is a multi-billion dollar industry now. And is it a big cash cow, money grab situation? Of course, there is that aspect of things, but we can't deny how incredibly beneficial these hormones and HRT is to a human female body. There is that we have to navigate, but also the fact that there's this whole generation of older women now who are struggling with all manner of issues. And I think my mom also had rheumatoid arthritis and it was pretty unchecked. And when we think about the immune modulating effects of estradiol and progesterone, and then the loss of it when you're in your 40s and 50s, and then you go into your 60s and 70s. And we see this across the board. We see the side effects, the downfall from not having access to that, because we see it in our mothers and our aunts and our grandmothers. They're not in great health across the board. There's so much to say about it. Sorry, I could go on and on.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are my thoughts.
Exactly. The biggest thing here is that there's so much nuance to it that I think, one, just telling women to go on birth control is doing a disservice. Two, telling women they can't go on HRT is a disservice too, because there needs to be a better conversation. So finding the practitioner to have those actual really good conversations is going to be so important to this.
Yeah, absolutely. This is it. And that's what we hear all the time too. I can't find anyone to help me. I don't even know what the answer to that is yet. I've almost stopped saying, see your doctor about this, because I know what the response is going to be for the most part. And I hate the fact that we're all like in these very different camps and it's like we're warring tribes or something. It's so frustrating to me because we were meant to be able to work with them and let them specialize and do their magic and let us do our magic. And it's a great team and the effort would really result in huge payoffs. And yet now we're here as divided as ever. And that makes me really sad because it doesn't need to be this way.
Right. So in the spirit of collaboration here, there are going to be times in which hormonal birth control might be necessary for a woman's specific life circumstance. So how can this be used as a temporary tool without somebody losing touch with their body signals? And I want to emphasize temporary tool.
Girl, I'm telling you, I had a moment, actually, I will say it was about sometime last year, and a college student had reached out to me. She was working on, I think, a paper of some kind, or maybe a thesis. I can't remember what she was working towards, but she wanted to interview me and talk to me about hormonal birth control and women using birth control devices and methods and various other things that were not fertility awareness based. And I was like, sure, sounds great. Okay, cool. And she took my period quiz and in my Fix Your Period membership, and the quiz is the sort of the entryway into it. We basically put like a red X next to all the types of hormonal birth control. And so there was like an automatic, this is bad for you, which now in retrospect, I'm like, oh my God, holy shit, that is pretty bad. And I could see how demoralizing and how shaming that could come across as to women who are just using this and maybe don't know or are in a situation like a life circumstance that it requires them to be on it. And so as soon as she said this, I had a moment of complete clarity and changed it all on my interface because I was so mortified that I was coming across as being this person who was shaming women for using any kind of birth control that's not like natural birth control. I want to preface all of this by saying that I am definitely not here to shame anyone for using any kind of hormonal birth control because pregnancy prevention, particularly in our country, in the current climate, matters immensely. Over 50% of pregnancies in the United States are unplanned. That is an outrageous number to me when you consider that this is the richest country in the world and we could have all kinds of resources dedicated to changing those stats. And I think that in addition to that, safety matters, our life circumstances really matter. And I want women to just be able to use something without feeling ashamed or like they're doing something wrong to themselves or harming themselves. But I also want them to know what tool it is that they're using and what that means. And so there are many situations, obviously, when a woman doesn't have control over her fertility. And there are a lot of women around the world who are in that situation. And so I completely understand we have to do what is right for us and for our safety and our well-being. I also, as a person coming from another country, I'm originally from a tiny island in the Caribbean called Antigua, and our medical care there is abysmal. And I feel like we're centuries behind even the US in terms of how someone even gets this kind of information, this kind of informed consent. And so when I think about women who have conditions like adenomyosis, endometriosis, uterine fibroids, or something else, like just heavy bleeding, period pain, kind of like me growing up, there were no other options. And today there really aren't still, unless you can afford to fly to the US or to Canada or to the UK or somewhere else to see an endometriosis specialist, to get excision surgery, if that's what's recommended for you or prescribed for you, you're kind of shit out of luck. You've got to do what you can and you've got to utilize what is available to you. I really recognize that there are a vast number of women across the world who do not have the privilege of even trying holistic methods or utilizing something else other than a form of hormonal birth control. So I think it's just having that awareness. And then, as we've been talking about, knowing that your nutrient status might be impacted, your gut might be affected, your inflammation markers might go up, and knowing that and actively working to address that if you can. Again, not everyone can, but being aware of that, I think, is a huge piece of this.
I think too, when we think about hormonal birth control, it was designed to be a temporary thing. And then there was people like me who were on it for 17 years because I wasn't given the education and the resources. And like, I went from a pill to an IUD. And I remember when I switched to the IUD, having a conversation with the OBGYN, and she's like, well, you have a copper IUD or you have the Mirena IUD. And I'm like, well, what's the difference? She's like, copper IUD, you're going to have really heavy bleeds and you might bleed for a long time. The Mirena, you might not have a period. I'm like, fucking no brainer. I don't want to have a period. My period was awful. So I'm like, give me that Mirena.
Yeah. Can you imagine that's how they sell it?
Right?
It's like, hello.
Right. And like, of course, this was like a 10-minute doctor appointment. So there wasn't the opportunity, nor did I probably know to ask the questions that I know now. But still, I feel like, and I walked home with both pamphlets and I don't think I opened either of them. And I just threw them in the trash can. I'm like, duh, she sold me. No period, done.
Girl, I feel you on that. I know. And I would say the vast majority of women would choose that as well. The copper IUD is framed as this non-hormonal option. And it's so great because there's no hormones. And I just keep thinking, I love the advertising and the marketing around this, because if hormones are such a problem in hormonal birth control, why are we touting this other thing as being so amazing because it doesn't have hormones? It's always interesting to observe how it all is playing out.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about those different types of birth control, because there are the synthetic hormone birth controls, and then there are the non-hormonal birth control options such as the copper IUD or Phexxi, but then there's also things like the fertility awareness method. So how can women, by gaining more information, determine what is going to be the best option, and how are those still offering the protection of not getting pregnant while still having a cycle?
Yes. Again, right? Such a big conversation. I feel like we could actually have a whole entire podcast episode on this. But to speak to what we were just talking about with the copper IUD, yes, it's highly effective. It's quote unquote hormone free. But as you said, it can worsen bleeding and cramps in some women. And I would say actually not some women, a lot of women. At least that's been my experience. And again, I recognize that you and I do this work in the world. So we're going to attract all of these women who have all kinds of hormonal issues. I actually just started working with a financial advisor, and she mentioned to me yesterday that another woman who works at their firm, who I'd also done a call with, was reading my book. And she was like, wow, I thought I had period problems. I had no idea that there were all of these issues. And I was like, yeah, when you're in this, you see all kinds of crazy things. And so with the copper IUD, yeah, it's non-hormonal, but I want to remind everyone that copper is a mineral and it has a number of roles and impacts on the body. And so this is something that we overlook. And again, this is not to say to you, don't get a copper IUD, not by any means. But again, it's awareness. It's knowing that there are potential side effects associated with it. So really reading that pamphlet, going online and seeing what you can potentially experience with the copper IUD. But copper is, like I said, a mineral. It's antagonistic to zinc. We tend to have a higher level of copper in our system. And remember, your uterus is not this like ironclad dome that nothing can get out of or get into. So remembering that you have that copper in your body and it could potentially create a zinc copper imbalance. And what does that do? What does that do to our adrenal glands, to our ovarian function, to our mental health? Copper is quite excitatory. So it can potentially contribute to cognitive issues that a lot of women also experience on the copper IUD, like anxiety that all of a sudden has just come out of nowhere, other mental health issues. So just, again, be aware of these potential side effects, physical and emotional. We have condoms. I don't know, the old faithful. I feel like, why have they been relegated to something that is just not useful anymore? I don't understand it. All of these doctors are telling these women that if they have an IUD, they should use condoms as well, or you can't just use condoms. You should really have an IUD or be taking the pill. And I'm just thinking, wow, that's new. And I'm sad about that. And you mentioned Phexxi as well. This is this non-hormonal vaginal gel that has to be used before intercourse, and it's not effective after you've had sex either. So it's good, or it's an option, but I feel like I would never trust it by itself. And then there's like a diaphragm, cervical cap, but those have kind of gone the way of the condom too, it seems. It's so strange. They're a lot less commonly used now. And then of course we have the fertility awareness method. So I feel like there is no perfect option. And I think that that's what's so sad to so many women, is that they just want some silver bullet birth control option that is going to not impact them physically and mentally and emotionally, and then also is going to be highly effective. And we're not quite there yet, I feel like.
I feel like the responsibility should not just be on the weight of women for birth control.
Great point.
Men play a big role in this. Women, ladies, you are fertile. You have one day that you ovulate, but there's a 5-day window, technically like 6 days, in which is your fertile window in which you potentially could get pregnant. And that guy could get you pregnant. They have sperm every day. They could. It just depends on your window of when your egg is going to be released. So I feel like we shouldn't have to carry the full responsibility of using something to prevent pregnancy. And all of these different hormonal and non-hormonal options for women do not protect you against an STI or STD.
Yes.
Condoms play a very important role. They are one of the oldest forms and like probably one of the most effective forms of birth control that we really need to bring back into the picture if you're not wanting to get pregnant and not wanting to catch any type of STI.
Yeah, girl, I'm telling you, just tell them. I know it is so difficult. And I think then we have the fertility awareness methods or the fertility awareness based methods. And then the sort of chronic misunderstanding of those as well, too, with the story or the narrative that they're just the rhythm method and it's been cast off as that. And I feel like we're finally changing that narrative to some degree, but it's still so pervasive. I mean, I went to gynecologist's office a couple of years ago. Well, she was a midwife, and I just thought, oh, well, she's a midwife, so maybe she'll be a little bit more holistic. I don't know. We'll see. It was when I was kind of newer to the area that I'm living in, and I needed to find someone. And I went there, and I guess she was the nurse practitioner. She was doing my weight and various other things, asking me what birth control method I used. And I said, FAM. And she was like, what is that? Just like that. That's the way she looked at me and said it. And I was like, the fertility awareness method? I don't know what that is. I mean, she had no clue what that was. And I was like, you work in a midwife's office. What are you telling me right now? So it is still quite shocking to us. And maybe you and I just live in some women's holistic health bubble that we're like shocked when people who are also in women's health have no clue about these things that we've known about for 20 years. So yeah, anyways, I think that fertility awareness is not only birth control, right? It is going to measure so many other aspects of our health, or at least track so many other aspects of our health, and is so empowering in so many ways. And I feel like it is so rooted in science as well too, and yet it is a cast off. It is not something that's well understood, and it also goes against our cultural narrative of, well, I'm just too busy for something like that. I'm too busy to understand my body. I'm too busy to take my temperature and observe cervical fluid changes. Like, what are you telling me? And it's really only when we're trying to get pregnant that we'll put some effort in. That makes me sad, because I think that women need to know that they are worth effort and time. They are worth getting to know their bodies. Their lives and their health are inherently valuable, and they should want to put some time and effort into understanding what's going on, because it has such a profound effect on their physical and mental health, not even in the present, but also in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nicole has tons of information about the fertility awareness method available. And that's something I walk through a lot of my clients with as well, when they decide that, yeah, they are ready to come off birth control and to really get to know their body again. And that was how I felt too. I'm like, okay, I am ready to meet my body, meet my hormones after 17 years and see what is going on here. And then when I didn't have a period, I'm like, well, what is happening here? I really don't understand my body now. So it took a lot for me to learn and understand my body. So that does then bring up a good point of like, let's say somebody is listening to this podcast episode and they're like, you know what? I have been kind of thinking about it's time to get off birth control, but I'm scared because many women went on birth control because they had horrific periods. And so they're a little trepidation around coming off of that. And there's post-pill syndrome, which people can experience. So how can they support their body while transitioning off? Like thinking about how do we prep your body to come off birth control? And then how are we supporting that body through that transition?
Yes. And this is something that I deeply relate to. I was absolutely terrified to come off the pill naturally. I had horrific periods as well. And I just thought, oh no, what is this going to look like? Obviously, I was working with this acupuncturist and he was making suggestions about different foods that I should be eating, as well as I was taking Chinese herbs and various other things. And so my first period back, it took a couple of months actually, but my first period after being on the pill was nowhere near what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be exponentially worse, but it wasn't, thankfully. And so there is that fear, and I completely understand it. So I think, like you said, right, there has to be some kind of preparation. I think that everything we've been talking about, first of all, it's awareness, right? What is going on? Do you need to work more on your nutrient intake through your diet? And do you need to stabilize your blood sugar? Do you need to look at what's happening with your stress? Because Sarah Hill talks about this in her book, Your Brain on Birth Control, where she talks about a study that was done on women on the pill, and their cortisol response, their stress response looked very blunted. It looked the same or similar to someone who had experienced extreme trauma. And I find this so fascinating. What exactly are these exogenous hormones or hormone-like substances doing to our bodies? And so really preparing and scaffolding your body in a way prior to coming off of it makes a lot of sense. It's going to make your ovaries work better, faster. Is what I think is going to happen. And so that, I think, is something to be considerate of, the nutrient depletion and various other aspects.
I will say too that when somebody comes off birth control, they should be very mindful about their fertility, because you might not go into a regular cycle right away. And so using condoms can be really effective too, because you don't want to accidentally get pregnant if that was not your intention of coming off birth control.
Well, isn't it interesting how that's what happens so often is doctors will just say, well, good luck. I'll see you in 9 months when you're having a baby. And that's their send off when women say, well, I just don't want to feel like shit anymore. It's just kind of crazy. Yeah. And so, yes, the conversation around your actual fertility has to happen in addition to everything else we're talking about. You have to be thinking about, okay, well, I could ovulate again. And the mechanism of the pill is to prevent ovulation. So if I'm ovulating, there's a chance of getting pregnant. So what do I need to do about that as well? So there are certainly considerations, but I just think that this idea that we can just take a pill and medicate away our fertility for years on end is so reflective of our society, and just being like, whatever, we can think about this when we need to think about it. But I think that this is an ongoing conversation that should be happening in our lives on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis when it comes to the health of our ovaries and our fertility and our hormones. The fertility piece really has to be discussed, and there has to be a solid plan in place for addressing how you're going to handle the fact that you're fertile again. So that's a huge piece of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nicole, I found this conversation to be really enlightening, and I'm sure our listeners will find it super helpful as well as they navigate their birth control journey. I know that you have your Fix Your Period quiz available that people can take. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. It's actually a Fix Your Period assessment. We've done a lot of updates to this whole thing. And now we have a brand new Fix Your Period app that allows someone to take this assessment, and then it will give them a whole host of information on what is going on with their menstrual cycle, their hormones potentially. And inside of that, we also offer protocols, an entire course. We have recommendations for various dietary and lifestyle things that you can integrate into your life to start improving your menstrual cycle health. I feel like, as we've talked about, this information should be accessible. We should all have this information. I feel like it's our birthright to know what the hell is going on with our hormones and have it explained to us in a simple way that is understandable and easy to digest. So that's what I have to offer for anyone who is kind of curious about what's going on and wants to dip their toe in and really understand what's happening with their hormones. The app also has a built out cycle tracker as well. I feel like I've thought of everything in the kitchen sink with this thing. So hopefully it will be useful to anyone who gets in there and tinkers around and plays with the assessment and everything that we have to offer in there.
Having been a student of yours and going through your 9-month certification program, I'm sure that this is going to be full of tons of information, and I'm sure everything is in there to help women navigate how to really support their periods and their menstrual health. Well, thank you so much, Nicole, for joining me today. How can people find you and connect with you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Brandee. This was amazing. I love reconnecting with anyone who's come through my program and just seeing your success and everything that you're doing in the world, because this is what it takes, right? It's like we all have to do this together. We're in this together. But you can find me at NicoleJardim.com, and that's basically sort of the clearinghouse for everything else. You can also go to fixyourperiod.com. And then I also have the Institute for Menstrual Health for anyone who is a practitioner who's interested in learning more about women's hormonal health and the cycle. And then on Instagram, for the most part, I feel like I keep it kind of boring and easy. So you'll find me on Instagram at Nicole M. Jardim.
I don't think your Instagram is boring, but so everybody should check out Nicole's Instagram because she does post really great, insightful content. Well, thank you so much, Nicole, for being here. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Healthy Buzz. I hope this conversation has left you feeling seen, supported, and ready to take the next step in your health journey. Love what you heard? Make sure you subscribe to Healthy Buzz so you never miss an honest conversation. And if you found this valuable, please take a moment to leave a review. I truly appreciate it. For exclusive weekly tips and holistic strategies, be sure to subscribe to my weekly newsletter. The link is in the show notes. Remember, this isn't just nutrition, it's permission to trust your body. I'll catch you on the next episode of Healthy Buzz.